Alright, for this build I'm going to go with another cutting board with a slightly challenging design. So let's get started. The woods I'm going to use for this one is cherry and sapele because I wanted two woods that are on opposite ends of the darkness spectrum. So let's get ripping it down and planing it out and get it ready for glue up. At this point I'm ripping all the cherry pieces in half because they're going to be half as thick as the sapele pieces in this board. Alright, now I'm going to run it through the thickness planer. Now what I'm doing here is I'm running a piece of like scrap white wood through the thickness planer first, and then following it with all the pieces I'm going to use for this board, and then trailing those pieces with another piece of white wood. That way it removes a bunch of the snipe that happens whenever you run your first piece and last piece through a planer. It puts the pressure up on the planer top before your pieces get there. That way you don't get that snipe on the ends. For the sapele pieces, I'm using pieces of walnut as my scrap to run them through, which is totally odd for me. I never use walnut as scrap because, well, frankly, walnut walnut is not scrap. But today it is. So the thickness I'm going for here is a specific thickness that will get me an even amount of what I'm going to call clusters across a width that I'm shooting for this board. So if you're going for an 8-inch wide board, you would want, let's say, 8 1-inch clusters. Alright, so here's the first glue up. Now what we're going to do is glue a cherry piece and then glue a sapele piece up against that cherry piece, and then glue another cherry piece up against that sapele piece on the other side. So we're making a sapele sandwich, and we're doing that the whole way across this 8 times in my case. It's important that you don't glue these clusters together because it's going to be easy to do that and lose track and just end up gluing a bunch of them together. But you don't want to do that because we need to turn every other one here for the next glue up. Alright, so here we are. They're all glued up. Don't forget to take a chisel or a card scraper and scrape off the excess glue before you go running them to the joiner. Now that we're at the joiner, we want to get one side flat, and then we want to take them over to the thickness planer to get the same thickness the whole way across it. And the idea is we want to end with these things being perfectly square and the same width whichever way you roll them. And this right here is where it's going to be really important to use your snipe protection pieces before and after you run your pieces through, because you need these to glue up firmly together, perfect glue ups, because this is where it will show up in your work at the end. Again, make sure every piece is perfectly square and that you take off an even amount on each end, because if you have a lopsided cherry thicknesses, it's going to show up in your end piece. So yeah, this here you want to make sure it's square and your cherry pieces, take out the same amount from both sides. Sometimes when you run through a planer or even a joiner, you end up with a little bit of tear out wood that shows up in your pieces. Make sure you turn the wood the opposite direction and run it through it again to get rid of those tear out parts. And then the opposite direction, it should not tear out. It's because it's fighting the grain as it goes through that it tears out. So you want to fix that problem. Alright, so here's that second glue up, and this is where it's really important that these pieces are perfectly square, because you want the sides to line up perfectly whenever you do this glue up. You don't want any of them hanging higher than the other. That way you take the least amount of material off as possible, trying to get these ends nice and smooth when you run them through the planer after this. Because if you have to take a bunch off, you're going to end up with lopsided cherry parts that'll show up in your end piece. Alright, so now after that glue up, I'm cutting off 1.5 inch chunks and getting them ready to glue them together again. Now before I hit the table saw, I ran it through the planer and just gave it a slight haircut. You don't want to run through there and take like 1/8 of an inch off, or you will be able to see it in your final piece. So you just want to barely be giving it a haircut to make sure that this glue up here is tight the whole way across them. Alright, so now that we're turning these pieces every other one, we're starting to see the pattern that we're going for here. We're going to do a light sanding over the edges to make sure that all those little pieces of tear out from the saw is off and does not interfere with our glue ups. And then we'll get this thing glued up and we'll be in the home stretch. Alright, alignment for this glue up is going to be key as well to making sure that there's no misalignments that show up in your final piece. So you really want to pay extra close attention to every single piece to make sure they're all lined up perfectly. Now if you notice, I glued a piece of white wood to the back of this piece, and that's because I do not have a drum sander. So in order to get this thing perfectly flat, I need to use my planer, which end grain boards are not supposed to go through a planer. One of the things that happens through every end grain board is it starts to blow out the back of the piece when it goes through, and that's what that piece of white wood does. It keeps that back end from fraying away on me. Now the biggest risk with sending end grain boards through your planer is that those blades might catch the end grains and fight it so much that it causes your board to blow to pieces inside that planer, and then it throws pieces everywhere. Quite loud, quite destructive, and it just ruins your work. So to mitigate that, what you need to do is take as thin of passes as possible, and that should help prevent that. Then go over to your table saw and slice off that piece of white wood that you used for protection, and then sand it away. For sanding, I start out at 80 grit, go to 120, and then go to 220 or 240. Between each passes, I use a pencil line, and then I sand away those pencil lines. I should do it twice. Sometimes I do it twice, sometimes I don't. I call them my keep them honest lines. That way it makes me hit every part of that board and keeps me honest, essentially. And that's why I call it the keep them honest lines, because if there's somewhere I'm going to skimp in my work, it's going to be sanding, because I really dread sanding. Alright, so here's my favorite part where we get to put oil in this board and just watch it come alive. Just watch. I'm really excited with how this thing turned out. I really enjoyed this project and I can't wait to do another one. If you liked this video and found the tips and tricks useful and learned something from it, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're interested in more content like this, hit the subscribe button with the notification bell to let you know the next time I post a video. Until next time, make something awesome.